7 shadow signs that separate real dark chosen ones from the pretenders. There's something about the word dark that stirs people. It attracts and repels. It fascinates and frightens. And in this age of spiritual branding, where everyone wants to be a mystic, a shadow worker, a dark feminine oracle, or a spiritual outlaw, the term dark chosen one gets thrown around like it's a fashion statement. But here's the truth I've come to understand, not from reading books or copying language from ancient texts, but from walking through the inner abyss myself. Most people who claim the dark haven't even stepped close to it. They wear the aesthetic, speak the words, perform the rituals, but they've never actually faced the primordial mirror. And that's why we need to talk about the shadow signs, the real ones. The ones you don't get to choose, the ones that choose you. I'm not here to flatter you. I'm not here to give you a list that makes you feel powerful because it sounds cool. I'm here to tell the truth, because if you are a real dark chosen one, you already know this path isn't sexy. It's not easy. It's not marketable. It's not something you would wish on someone. It's something you survived. And through that survival, you were reborn not as a performance, but as a presence. And that presence is what separates you from the pretenders. So let's go deep. Let's begin with the first shadow sign. You were initiated through personal destruction, not spiritual retreat.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Let me be clear. A dark chosen one doesn't awaken in a yoga class or during a cacao ceremony. We awaken in collapse, in betrayal, in loss so deep it rewires your nervous system, in the kind of pain that doesn't just hurt, it breaks the illusion of who you thought you were. You don't get to choose your awakening date. It chooses you. Maybe it came through the death of someone you loved. Maybe it came through abuse that no one believed. Maybe it came through a complete identity fracture where everything you built fell apart. And in that moment, something ancient stirred inside you. Not love, not light, will. The will to rise, and the will to see. The will to face the darkness not as an enemy, but as an initiation teacher. That's the first sign. Real, dark, chosen ones were initiated through fire. Pretenders were inspired by Instagram quotes. The second shadow sign is this: you've tasted power and walked away from it. Real power, manipulative power, sexual power, and energetic dominance. You've had moments where you could have used your insight, your charisma, your magnetism to control others, and you chose not to. Not because you were afraid, but because you understood something the pretenders never learn, that real darkness is not about domination. It's about discernment. The path of the dark chosen one is laced with temptation. We are tested constantly, not in childish ways, but in moments where we could gain everything if we just gave our soul away in pieces. And we've seen what happens when others do. We've watched people lose themselves in performance, in ego, in false empowerment. But we chose silence instead of applause, stillness instead of seduction, integrity instead of influence. And that choice over and over again is what builds spiritual gravity that cannot be faked. The third sign: you've been exiled not just from society, but from spiritual communities. The real dark chosen ones don't get invited to the retreats. We don't get featured on the podcasts. We get rejected by the light workers, the love and light channels, the high vibrational circles. Why? because we hold a frequency that triggers unreconciled illusion. We don't perform purity. We don't suppress shadow. We embody the tension of being fully human and fully divine. And that embodiment makes people uncomfortable because it's real, because it's raw, because it doesn't fit in the curated world of spiritual aesthetics. And so we walk alone, not because we want to, but because we have to. Because the path taught us that belonging is not worth the price of abandoning what we know to be true. Now let me ask you something that might sting. Have you ever had to destroy your own identity just to find something true underneath it all? If the answer is yes, you're closer to this path than you realize. Because the fourth shadow sign is this: you've died before you ever stopped breathing. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean ego death, soul rupture. The kind of unraveling where you question if you even exist anymore, where you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back, where your name, your career, your relationships all feel like costumes you were forced to wear to survive. And when those costumes fall away, you're not left with clarity. You're left with void, and in that void, something else begins to form. Something not built by society, something not handed to you by culture, something raw, sovereign, unshakable. That's the real beginning of the dark chosen one path, not a crown, but a collapse. The fifth shadow sign is one most people lie about. You've met your own inner predator, and you didn't flinch. This is the moment that separates the real ones from the pretenders more than anything else. Every human has a shadow, but the dark chosen ones are forced to meet it. We don't get to spiritual bypass it. We are dragged into it. We see our jealousy, our hatred, our hunger for revenge. We see the parts of ourselves that could hurt, manipulate, harm. And instead of pretending we're pure, we own it, we study it, we understand it. Why? Because only by owning it can we integrate it. Only by facing it can we choose not to act from it. And that choice is what gives us spiritual muscle, not avoidance, not denial, conscious confrontation. I'll stop here, because what's coming next is even deeper. The mirror that burns why only the real ones can survive radical self-confrontation. There's a mirror that most people avoid their entire lives. It's not the one in your bathroom. It's not the one in your selfies. It's the mirror that shows you not who you want to be, but who you are when no one is watching. It's the mirror that doesn't speak in compliments. It speaks in silence, in pressure, in the unbearable clarity of your own unfiltered truth. And if you are truly a dark chosen one, you've stood in front of that mirror not once, but many times and let it burn you down to ash. That's why this path is not about glamour. It's about grit, because only the real ones can survive radical self-confrontation and not run back to distraction, denial, or delusion. This is the sixth shadow sign, and it's not for the faint of heart. You faced the parts of yourself that you were terrified to admit existed, and you didn't look away. You didn't hide behind spiritual language. You didn't escape into rituals or crystals or mantras. You sat in it. The guilt, the shame, the raw, trembling recognition of how you've hurt others, how you've betrayed yourself, how you've manipulated, lied, performed, self-sabotaged. You didn't excuse it. You didn't justify it. You owned it, fully. And in that ownership, you reclaimed something that no external practice could ever give you: sovereignty over your own evolution. Let me tell you something most spiritual communities will never say out loud. Radical self-honesty is more powerful than any mantra, any ceremony, any retreat. When you finally admit to yourself, I chose that, I allowed that, I caused that, you break a cycle that's older than this lifetime. You stop being a victim of your shadow and start becoming the master of it. And that mastery doesn't mean perfection. It means consciousness. It means when the old patterns rise up, you see them. You feel them. But you don't let them drive the car. That's real spiritual maturity. That's the quiet strength behind the eyes of every true dark chosen one. You see, pretenders want the title without the cost. They want to talk about shadow work without ever doing it. They memorize terms, quote Jung, and post about trauma healing, but they've never stared into the black hole inside them and felt the terror of having no identity left to protect. And that's why they'll never carry the same weight. Because the weight of this path is earned through integration, not imitation, through nights where sleep doesn't come, and through memories that haunt you until you finally metabolize them, and through the slow, agonizing process of turning your wounds into wisdom and not rushing the alchemy. So here's the real question: can you sit with the version of you that made the worst decisions of your life and offer them love without letting them lead? Because if you can't, you're not ready. And that's okay. But if you can, if you've already done that, you're further on this path than you think. That's what separates us. Not how much darkness we've touched, but how much of it we've made peace with. That's the real work. Not casting out demons, not cleansing spirits, but sitting at the table with your own and saying, I see you. I know why you exist, but I choose differently now. And that choice, made over and over again, rewires your entire reality. It's not dramatic, it's not fireworks. It's subtle but seismic, and it changes everything. This is why real dark chosen ones often operate in silence. We don't need to prove anything. We don't need to flaunt our power. We are the power, because we've reclaimed every piece of ourselves others tried to shame, suppress, or exile. We've walked back into our own hell and retrieved our own soul, not with holy books, but with unwavering self-responsibility. That's what makes us dangerous, not because we're evil, but because we're free. And freedom, true inner freedom, is the most terrifying thing to a world built on control. That's why you'll be labeled, misunderstood, and feared, because you're not ruled by guilt, you're not owned by shame, you're not manipulated by praise. You've seen your own darkness and chosen to stay conscious anyway. That's the badge. That's the proof, not the words, not the look, not the rituals, but the resilience. We'll go even deeper next. The sacred enemy, why you had to be hated to awaken your true role as a catalyst. There's something no one tells you. When your soul signs up to walk the path of a real dark chosen one, you will be hated. Not because you've done something wrong, but because your very existence disrupts. You trigger things in people that they aren't ready to see. You reflect truths they've buried. And when someone is not ready to confront their own shadow, they will project it onto you. They'll call you dangerous, arrogant, manipulative. They'll say you're too intense, too much, too dark. But what they're really saying is, you make me feel things I've spent my whole life trying to avoid. And if you've ever wondered why your presence seems to provoke such intense reactions, this is why. You were never meant to be liked. You were meant to be a catalyst. You see, the sacred enemy archetype is something the real ones carry whether we want to or not. We don't get the luxury of being universally loved. We don't get to hide in the middle lane. We're either deeply revered or deeply rejected, sometimes both by the same people. But why? Because we carry a frequency that agitates the unconscious. The very thing that makes us powerful, our unwillingness to perform, to pretend, to pacify, is the thing that makes others uncomfortable. And so we become mirrors, not the soft ones that flatter, the burning ones that expose, the ones people either bow to or try to shatter. At first, this can feel like a curse. You'll question yourself. You'll wonder if you're really the villain everyone makes you out to be. You'll carry guilt that doesn't belong to you. You'll shrink, apologize, over-explain. But eventually, if you stay on the path, you'll realize something sacred. You were hated not because you were bad, but because you were true. And truth, when it walks into a room, doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings purge. Sometimes it brings chaos. Sometimes it brings the collapse that someone's soul has been begging for, but their ego has been resisting. Let me ask you something dangerous. What if being misunderstood is part of your assignment? What if your rejection was the very thing that protected your integrity? Because here's what happens when you're rejected by the spiritual mainstream, by the family system, by the social circles. You're forced inward. You're forced to build your sense of self from within, not from approval. You're forced to find your own voice, your own compass, your own truth. And that inner authority, that's what makes you unshakable. That's what makes you real. You don't need applause to know you're aligned. You don't need validation to know you're awake. You've been tempered by fire, and that fire forged discernment. Not just of others, but of yourself. The sacred enemy is not someone who seeks conflict, but it's someone who can't be silenced by it. We don't go looking for drama, but we refuse to dilute ourselves to avoid it. We're not aggressive, but we're uncompromising. And that energy is exactly what burns illusions to the ground. That's why people either evolve around us or eject us completely. There's rarely an in-between, and after a while we stop taking it personally because we realize it's not about us. It's about what we activate. If you've lived your life being scapegoated, attacked, misrepresented, there's a reason. It's not karma. It's not punishment. It's purpose. The dark chosen ones are used by the universe to initiate others, but sometimes through love, sometimes through rupture, sometimes by simply being unapologetically ourselves. Our role is not to be digestible. Our role is to be disruptive enough to awaken something real. And here's where it gets even more powerful. Once you stop trying to be liked, you become limitless. You stop filtering your truth. You stop betraying your instincts. You stop shrinking to be palatable. And in that raw, unfiltered state, you become a force of nature, not because you're trying to be, but because you're no longer pretending not to be. And that's when your real influence begins, not through followers, not through fame, but through frequency. You walk into a room and timelines shift. You speak and veils fall. You exist and people either rise or run. This is the path, not of the guru, not of the influencer, but of the initiator. And initiators are never popular until years later, when the people we triggered finally realize we were never the enemy. We were the invitation, the living challenge to their illusions, the sacred disruptor their soul was praying for. We're almost at the end, but the final sign, the seventh shadow sign, is the most difficult and the most liberating. The final sign, why you were never meant to be saved, only remembered. There comes a moment on this path when everything goes quiet. Not because the chaos has stopped, but because you have. You stop chasing. You stop fixing. You stop trying to be understood, protected, or even healed. You stop looking for someone to come rescue you, validate you, or make your pain make sense. You stop because somewhere deep inside, something ancient remembers. And that memory is the seventh and final shadow sign, the most difficult to accept, but also the key that unlocks your true power. You were never meant to be saved. You were only ever meant to remember who you are. This part of the journey is where the pretenders fall away. Because up until now, you can fake it. You can mimic the language. You can wear the aesthetic of the wounded healer, the misunderstood mystic, the dark oracle. But when all the noise falls away, when the world offers you no more crutches, no more applause, no more comfort, only one thing remains: you. The unfiltered, unguarded, uncompromised you. And this is where most people run. Because that version of you, it holds no mask, no role, no story. It just is. And that presence, pure, primal, unadorned, is terrifying to those who've built their identity on being saved by something outside of themselves. But if you are truly chosen, you won't run. You'll sit. You'll breathe. You'll face the stunning truth that you've always had the key. You've always been the one. Not in an arrogant way, but not in a mythological main character fantasy, but in a deeply humbling, soul-anchoring way that says, I am not waiting anymore. I am remembering. Remembering what? That you are more than your trauma. That you are more than your pain. That you are more than the projections, the exile, the spiritual performance. But you are the initiator and the initiated, the destroyer and the rebuilder, the student and the source. And when you remember that, when you stop asking to be saved and start reclaiming your own divinity, everything changes. Not because your life suddenly becomes easier, but because you stop negotiating with your own power. You stop explaining your path to people who were never meant to walk beside you. You stop needing to justify your intensity, your clarity, your boundaries. You simply exist in full spectrum. And that existence, that's what makes you untouchable. You become a frequency that no system can own. A presence that no label can contain. A soul that doesn't bow to fear, guilt, or spiritual hierarchy. And that's why the world will try to tame you, trick you, or turn you into a teacher they can control. But you'll smile because you know better. You know that your path was never about becoming someone else's savior. It was about remembering you never needed one. And in that remembrance, you become the permission slip for others to do the same. So let me ask you now, at the end of this journey, what would your life look like if you stopped waiting to be saved and started living like you've already been found? Because that's the threshold. That's the last veil. The moment you stop looking outward and start embodying inward. When you no longer seek the divine, you become it, breath by breath, in the realness of your everyday life. That's the final shadow sign, not a vision, not a download, not a ritual, but the radical embodiment of your own remembrance. This is the end of the illusion and the beginning of everything real. You were not sent here to be a follower. You were not sent here to be rescued. You were sent here to wake up. And now you have. You're not just walking the path anymore. You are the path, and no one can take that from you. If you felt this in your bones, share it with someone who's on the edge of remembering who they are too. They might not need a savior, they might just need to hear this truth.